Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. Soulbag right here. And today, we got a fun reaction planned for you guys as it involves one of my favorite sci-fi franchises and its standout starfighter that is also one of my favorite starfighters ever in sci-fi history. That would be Star Wars's Incom T-65 X-Wing. This is a space fighter that I've been a huge fan of ever since I was a wee soul. I can remember being, what, 6, 7, 8 years old. Oh God, I didn't. Okay, let's just pretend I didn't say that. I was a young lad. I'll say 8. I was a young lad at 8 years old, constantly rewinding the old VHS tape of Star Wars: A New Hope for the Death Star battle and the trench run, seeing the X-wings fight TIE fighters. I absolutely loved it. Like, man, that the amount of times I would just sit there and just rerun that VHS to watch that sequence. Like, to me, that was Star Wars. People love Star Wars for the Force, right? The whole Jedi, the Sith, right? Lightsabers, dark side, all the cool stuff. And while that stuff is really cool, I've always been a huge fan of the space naval warfare. The starships fighting each other in cool dogfights, and massive naval battles, between the Empire and the Rebellion. And the X-wing, for me, that to me, that is Star Wars. Anytime I think of Star Wars, I think X-wing. So if you ask me to make myself a character in the Star Wars universe, or what one of my favorite Star Wars games are, it's going to involve the X-wing. So that being said, Max Lore, an amazing lore channel that dives through all sorts of really cool topics, usually in sci-fi, to explore all sorts of really cool vehicles, topics, ideas, and stuff, history, lore. Definitely go check out their channel if you haven't yet. They put an incredible amount of effort into their videos. This cool little screen you see behind me here, that's animation. That's not just that's not just a simple screenshot. That's a freeze frame for animation that Max Lore does for all his videos. It's incredible painstaking work he puts into both as far as the information side as well as the animation side to kind of bring history, so to speak, to life. Very cool. Highly recommend it. Hey, Gaming Nerd, it's good to see you, dude. Hope you're doing well. Thanks so much for the bits. Really appreciate it. So, without further ado, let's check out the history and lore behind my favorite starfighter ever of all time, the X-Wing.
If there was one ship that could be chosen to symbolize the Rebel Alliance during the time of the Galactic Civil War, then there can only be one choice.
Okay, give me a second. I need to move myself over a little bit. Yeah, we're gonna shrink down just a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Shrink it down. Looks like we were gonna cover the subtitles. You don't want to do that. You don't want to cover the subtitles. All right, let's check this bad boy out.
If there was one ship that could be chosen to symbolize the Rebel Alliance during the time of the Galactic Civil War, then there can only be one choice. The darling child of the Incom Corporation, the T-65 X-Wing.
There it is. Look at that beauty. I had a couple models up when I was a kid.
It starts with the Incom Corporation.
I broke it accidentally.
A repulsor lift manufacturer based on the world of Freysia, who grew into an atmospheric and starfighter manufacturing company for centuries prior to the Battle of Yavin. Some of their most famous accomplishments being the ARC-170 starfighter used by the Old Republic during the Clone War.
Wait, they created the ARC-170? I didn't know that. Oh, snap. Oh, wow. Okay, I need to look a little more into that, because that's kind of wild. Because I know that So the Arch 170 here, as you can see, the silhouette obviously very much looks like an early design of an X-wing. And when I saw that in, gosh, I'm gonna really date myself here. When I saw that in theaters, in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, I thought it was like, oh man, is this supposed to be like the predecessor to the X-wing? Technically not. The predecessor, I believe, for the X-wing was the Z95 Headhunter, which actually you just mentioned here. Both share very similar silhouettes. I think this was more of a kind of like a nod to people watching episode 3 of, hey, you guys know what's coming next, right? Like, this stuff is coming in the next episode. You know the silhouette. You love it. Right? Like that one scene where um, the, what is it, Anakin and Obi-Wan were meeting up with some of the clone starfighters, right? That are flying the Arc 170, and they both lock their S foils in attack position, and it comes up with silhouettes very similar to TIE fighters and X wings. I think that was probably more of just kind of like a fan nod to some cool silhouettes that will become reality in the next episode, for the Star Wars movies. But I don't think this would like. I think this was a design that was introduced in the earlier part of the Clone War. But the Z95 Headhunter, you know, also has a very similar silhouette to the Z95 Headhunter. Basically, looks like an like two engines, as you can see, like on the Arc 170 here. It has two engines on the side, and then it has two wings, coming out from each side. One wing on one side, one wing on the other side. It looks very similar to an X-wing with its S-foils undeployed, you know, and that was kind of where the technological leap from the Z95 to the X-wing would happen. But seeing this Arc 170, it's like, oh wait, did it come from the Arc 170? No, I'm pretty sure that was just a cool little reference. Speaking of cool little references, the reason this starfighter right here is called the Arc 170 is because in the art dump files they had uh when they were designing various starfighters and stuff for this movie for episode 3, this design was in the ARC 170 folder, which I think was supposed to be like some sort of art dump, right? Eventually this design got chosen, and I think they just were like, well, we're gonna call this thing. All right, well, it was in the Arc 170 folder. All right, we're gonna call it the Arc 170 Starfighter. So,
and the Z95 Headhunter,
oh, see, there
one
it
of the
is.
most prolific and
See, look at that. Okay, that it actually has four. Okay, let me retract my statement a little bit. This one has four engines. You can see four engines, top to bottom there. The only thing is that it has a single wing. See, a single wing coming out on each side there. You got the blaster cannons on the side, but the wings don't divide. They don't separate like they do on the X-wing. It's also kind of funny that it's called an X-wing and it makes the obvious shape of an X. And you look at the Y-wing, it makes the obvious shape of Y. If you look like if you look at an A-wing, looking from top down, it looks like an obvious shape of an A. You look at the B-wing bomber, a tactical fighter bomber. You put it on that side, it looks like the letter B. Yeah, I was like, okay, guys, all right. I don't think the E-wing had that same effect, but all the other ones kind of look like their letter sake, which is kind of funny.
versatile starfighters in the galaxy during the era of the Galactic Civil War for private organizations and government militaries with very lean funding. And income would have continued on.
You find a lot of those guys in uh, the Star Wars X-wing space combat simulators from the 90s. X-wing, TIE fighter, and then Rebel. Was it the was it was it Alliance? Was it Rebel Alliance? Crap, I'm forgetting the third game's name. But anywho, yeah, those tend to be piloted by like pirates, or local militias.
This course Had it not been for the end of the Clone Wars and the rise of the Galactic Empire 19
Oh,
years
speaking of
before
which,
the Battle of Yavin,
yeah, there's a screenshot from
Emperor
the TIE Fighter.
Palpatine, like many Sith throughout
There's a
history,
screenshot for TIE
demanded
Fighter.
control, and he began to exert that control increasingly on Incom, forcing them to stop their current efforts to continue improving the Z-95 Headhunter design, and instead focus on creating landing barges for the Imperial Army. But the designers and engineers of Incom chafed at the growing demands and restrictions Palpatine enforced, and while they did build and complete the new prototype meant to replace the Z-95, they had no desire to let it fall into the hands of the Empire.
Yeah.
But if Incom, the corporation, could not renege on their deal with the Imperials, then it was left up to the people who made the Starfighter Manufacturing Corporation what it was to take an almost unthinkable course of action. Defection.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think of, if Palpatine hadn't done what he did with pressuring Incom, there was an actual chance, at least in my mind, there would have been an actual chance we could have been seeing X-Wings, the T-65 X-Wing in the Imperial Navy. Man, the Rebels would have been in big trouble if that would have been the case, because the Rebels, I believe they still had like the old Y-Wing, you know, which were by then like stripped down compared to the versions they had when they were brand new during the Clone Wars. Like those things are pretty heavy fighters, but they can't, got X-wing going up against a Y-wing just in a pure gun to gun fight. That's a rough run for the Y-wing. I couldn't imagine X-wings and TIE fighters both working together. That would spell doom for the Rebel Space Navy. My first exposure to Star Wars in any shape was or form was TIE Fighter, the PC game. Heck yeah! What a way to introduce yourself to the franchise. Star Wars TIE Fighter, still one of my favorite Star Wars games of all time. I would dare say probably my favorite Star Wars game ever.
4 prototypes of this cutting edge.
The only thing that keeps it from being an absolute perfect is that you can't fly an X-Wing in TIE Fighter, and that makes me sad, because that is my favorite Starfighter. Speaking of which, X-Wings.
Starfighter were made and based on Incom's home planet of Phrasia. It was hoped by the defecting Incom staff that they could take their prototypes, along with themselves, and deliver them to the Rebel Alliance. However, Imperial security had discovered their intentions, and they moved to imprison the defectors as well as take possession of their prize starfighters. Fortunately, a daring raid by a small rebel strike force was able to liberate the prototypes from Phrasia, and later in a subsequent raid, rescue the Incom scientists and engineers from right under the noses of the Empire's forces, thus securing the loyalty of Incom's top staff and the possession of their new starfighters. But what was this fighter that was so cutting edge and so powerful
look at that
that it
silhouette.
compelled Incom staff members to keep it away from the Empire?
Oh,
What was
man.
this fighter that would enable the Alliance's victory over the first Death Star, and then become a flying symbol for the rebels that would inspire others to resist the tyranny?
Dang, look at that. That X-Wing be putting in the work. Holy crap. What was that? Was that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 20, 30, 40, 50. I'm not even going to finish reading out that. Just another day in the office for this guy, I guess. Jeez Louise. Is he a super ace? That is what? Oh. Oh, well, that's why. This is probably... I mean, look at the markings here. Look at that. Not only all those starfighters. Look at that right there. We got a Death Star here. This might very well be Luke Skywalker's X-Wing. I don't think there's very many people that can put a Death Star on their X-Wing fuselage, Yeah. I was like, man, that could have Eric Hartman had like 352 kills. Man. You could have sold me that this was his starfighter if if you told me that, not knowing much about him. But I see that. I see that right there. I'm gonna. This thing kind of getting in the way. I trust people will probably have their own CC up for closed caption if they really want to. I'm trying to figure out how to paint kill tallies on his BF 109. Hartman was the highest scoring German ace of World War II. That makes sense. Yeah, he had he had that kind of name. I was like, yeah, he's probably an old German World War II ace, but he doesn't have a Death Star on his fuselage. That goes to Luke Skywalker. Or Wedge Antilles. Was it Wedge Antilles? Also, what's his name? Did they also fire Lando Calrissian, right? And his I don't remember the co-pilot's name he had with them, but they all contributed to taking down the second Death Star that was in under construction. So
Of the Galactic Empire. Well, you've probably guessed it, making all this build-up pointless. Or you paid attention to the thumbnail when you clicked it. It's the X-Wing, the T-65 X-Wing starfighter. Its name comes from the 4 S-foil wings which typically remain closed in sublight and hyperspace flight, but open into a X shape when in combat conditions. The X-Wing is perhaps the largest contributor when talking about
oh, I don't know if you guys can hear it, but I think the music happening in the background, I think that's supposed to be Dark Forces, isn't it? That sound like Dark Forces there for a moment. Also, this X-Wing here, as you can see, it has, uh, it has its wings spread out. The idea was that having your wings spread out, your field of fire would grow a lot more. So if you fire, if you fire your shots in tandem or all at the same time, it would spread over a wider area and it would give you a better chance of hitting a target. That sounds great in theory, but the problem is convergence. Because these things are spread so far apart. In normal firing spreads, like in World War II fighters that had their cannons spread out really far from the center line, if they all shoot in a straight line, they're going to continue going in that straight line. They'll eventually arc down because of gravity and stuff. But if you have a fighter in front of you trying to shoot, if one of those cannons don't have their center line on that fighter, there's a good chance it's not going to hit it. That's kind of like the same thing with this X-Wing here. They have 4 cannons, sure, but they're spread really far out to reach a wider area. But if the fighter they're shooting at is in the middle, they're not going to hit it if the cannons are shooting straight. So you got to have convergence. And convergence is a planned intersection where all the shots are kind of going to meet in the center in front of the aircraft, so that way when they shoot, they're all cross over in front of each other and they'll hit whatever you're trying to shoot at a certain range. The World War II fighters did that, like the P-51, the P-47, those types. They all had convergence that would shoot and they would eventually cross in between each other. When you played Star Wars X-Wing on the PC, was it 93, 94? I don't believe convergence was a thing yet. And so you had to deal with that issue. You would basically have to try and maneuver your starfighter in a way where all that volume of fire would hit the starfighters, especially with the TIE fighters, because their silhouettes are so small. If you're looking directly behind them, because you only have that bulb part in the middle and the 2 big wings on the side, which might as well be paper thin when you're shooting them from behind. If you're shooting them from the side, and you're gonna hit that thing anywhere, but from behind, you're gonna get a lot of missed shots. So in the recent fan-made update for X-Wing, which we're actually going to play tomorrow for May the 4th, Star Wars Day, there's actually a option you can enable to add convergence to the X-Wing's field of fire, so that way it doesn't have that issue anymore, which is awesome. I would assume X-wings in the Star Wars universe have convergence programmed for that very specific issue, and maybe something they can toggle off and on. But yeah, that was the idea for having a really wide field of fire. Um, for why the wings spread out like that. Although, like Max Lore mentioned earlier, the wings need to be closed in order to achieve faster flight or um, hyperspace travel. But they need to be opened when you fire because you can't fire them when it's at a closed position. I don't remember if that was like a design issue or something at the beginning, but I think later models of the X-Wing have it to where you can actually fire the cannons in a closed position, but it wasn't possible during the Battle of Yavin. Um, I believe that addition would happen later on. But yeah, that's kind of the idea why you have the X-Wing's wings spread apart like that. It's to cover a wider field of fire. Yeah, not all. Yeah, right. No, not all World War II birds needed the convergence because, like, one of my favorite World War II birds, you know, um, the was it the P-38? Um, was the P-38? P-38 Lightning, right? I hope I'm getting that right. They have all their cannons, machine guns and cannons mounted in the center nose, so convergence isn't required anymore. But for aircraft that have their weapons spread apart to the wings, yeah, you need that.
But the Rebel Alliance's superiority in starfighter technology. This was an important edge to have, as the TIE fighters of the Imperial Navy made up for their relative shortcomings by using swarm tactics in superior numbers.
Yep.
The Rebels could not match that. Their numbers were far less, their industrial base not nearly as strong compared to the monolith that was the Galactic Empire, and the careless disposal of lives supposedly went against what the Rebel Alliance believed in.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the big distinction between. Let me move stuff over a little bit. That's kind of the big distinction between the Imperial Navy's thought process compared to the Rebellion. The Rebellion was really big on like, you know, um, big technological superiority to help their pilots survive and to take advantage where they could. Since they have to operate with smaller numbers compared to the industrial might of the Empire, which is all about like just fielding nothing but glass cannons. Just overwhelm the enemy in just a huge volume of fire, and just overwhelm them with so many targets they can't possibly target them all without them eventually getting destroyed just through pure attrition. Right. That's why in a uh, X-wing, you see pilots, like myself here in this helmet. It's obviously open. I got the little visor in front of me, but otherwise it's a relatively open helmet. Imperial fighter pilots have a fully enclosed, environment enclosed jumpsuit and helmet because their fighters on the inside do not have life support functionality. So light support functionality was only in the suits they wore. They didn't care about the fighters. The fighters, you just crank out the fighters, get in the fighter, go fight the rebellion. Yeah, it was a very different kind of uh very different kind of two different kinds of philosophies for fighting. Empire had a huge problem with incompetent leadership. Yeah.
The Rebel Starfighter Corps literally had to do more with less, and the X-Wing epitomized that, as it was a highly versatile, technologically superior starfighter that could fill any mission profile the Alliance High Command might need. Reconnaissance, atmospheric operations, escort duties, dogfighting, and hit and fade strikes all fell within its purview, making its title of Space Superiority Fighter well earned. From a technical perspective, one can better understand why the X-Wing was such a game-changer in the Galactic Civil War when compared to its Imperial space superiority equivalent, the TIE Fighter. So let's start with speed. In space, the
Yeah.
X-Wing can go up to 100 megalights per hour top speed at maintenance power levels.
Oh,
Same with the TIE Fighter. We start with speed in this case, as despite their similar roles, this
fascinating.
is the
All right,
only specification
I gotta pause this for real quick. So that designation, 100, what's that? Let's say megalight, which is a sublight measurement of speed. That is something I've always wondered in the Star Wars Space Combat Simulator games, is that they use that notation, for speed. It's like max speed for an X-wing that it doesn't have. That's just using its power distribution towards shields, engine, and weapon output, all not all nominal. It moves at 100 MGLT maximum, or just 100 in the game. They don't say MGLT in it. But I was always like, what's the unit of measurement? Why is this thing moving at 100? Why does this thing move at 80? Why does this move at 120? Like, what does that mean as far as like speed goes? Well, now I know it's a unit of measurement that they have in the Star Wars universe. That makes sense now. Okay.
where both fighters are at parity. However, the TIE fighters have the X-Wing speed on acceleration, maneuverability, and speed when inside of an atmosphere. For deflector shields, the X-Wing has a deflector shield generator created by a company called Chempat, and which is rated at 50 SBD, whereas the TIE fighter has
It doesn't
none.
have one. Yeah,
Like, nothing at all.
it's got nothing.
Just its bare hull exposed to the void of space and the laser fire from rebels trying to shoot them down.
Just fly gooder.
Next, the sensor array, which is an often overlooked and unglamorous system.
Oh,
But in this case, it was important to the X-Wing's capabilities.
it's got a little
Located
nose.
in
Look
the
at that
nose was a Fabritech sensor suite that was designed for much larger ships, and further improved upon by adding specialist packages from Incom subcontractors. These sensor systems greatly assisted in the X-Wing's ability to act as an independent unit by providing superior telemetry and flight control, thus reducing the reliance on a capital ship or support vessel in the field.
Yeah.
Moving on to hyperspace capability, we find another attribute the TIE fighters do not have, as the X-Wings are equipped with a Class 1 hyperdrive, which were often used for the long-range hit-and-fade operations that Rebel starfighters became known for during the course of the Galactic Civil War.
So here, I'm gonna bring it back a little bit. Okay. So when they're talking about hyperdrives here, the hyperdrive classes are really interesting with their thought process for traveling in space. Class 1 hyperdrives are like peak. They're pretty amazing. I'm not even sure if there's a class better than that, but that's like top tier. Essentially what that means, which I believe this was all the idea of like classes and like speeds and all that stuff. I think all that was designed specifically for the West End D6 Star Wars RPG that came out in the late 80s, which was basically like using all sorts of information they got from LucasArts or Lucasfilm, as well as their own ideas of like how this would all work in Star Wars reality. You know, they came up with a classification for hyperdrives. Class 1 hyperdrive is incredibly fast. You can get to one area of the galaxy to another within a certain time frame. And it was class 1. It was about as good as you can get. There might be better, that I'm unaware of, but basically class 1, that's peak. Class 2 means that it's going to take twice the amount of time to get from point A to point B compared to a class 1. Class 3 and class 4 subsequently would take 3 and would take 4 times the amount of time it would take to get from point A to point B. That's how classification works in hyperdrive measurements. Class 1 is the best, class 2 is slower, class 3 is slower, class 4 is slower. How slow is it? Well, it'll take you 2 or 3 or 4 times longer to get there. That's the idea.
For during the course of the Galactic Civil War. Hit and fade being the term Rebel High Command used for missions that would have their strike craft hyper into an area of operations, complete their objectives, and then hyper out again before a stronger Imperial response can be mustered.
Dang, I want to get back to
Essentially,
hosting a Star
guerrilla
Wars
warfare
RPG
by
again.
any other name, which the X-Wing excelled at. Whereas the TIE Fighter and its sisters, the TIE Interceptor and the TIE Bomber, simply were not designed for hyperdrive integration.
Yep, they
Which
all come
meant that the
from.
mainline TIE starfighters needed a base or capital ship in the area of operations to deploy and return to,
Yep.
versus the rebels who did not
Oh.
have to
Hold on. What does that say? Dole's TIE Fighter. Dole's TIE Fighter that was modified by Jaina Skywalker to have a hyperdrive being an exception. Also, mainline being TIE Fighters, Interceptors, and Bombers. Yeah. There would eventually be other TIE Fighters developed, like the TIE Defender, the TIE Advanced, and a couple of other ones. They would actually eventually have their own shields and hyperspace capability. Whereas the mainline stuff, like I said, it was all, accuracy by volume, overwhelm your enemy and just destroy them straight out of just attrition. That was the idea. So you saw these guys, the super, or not the superstar, the regular Star Destroyers, they're basically a battleship crossed with a carrier. They had their own complement of starfighters to escort them into fields of battle. And without a Star Destroyer or other carriers, the TIE Fighter was kind of stuck. But, the Empire doesn't care. They're saving money.
expose their few capital ships to immediate danger to carry out the business of war. Then there's offensive armament. The TIE Fighters equipped with two LS-1 laser cannons manufactured by Sinar Fleet Systems, which, like every other Imperial craft, had the distinctive Imperial green color in their laser blasts,
Pew, pew, pew.
whereas the X-Wing uses 4 KX-9 model laser cannons, or 4 IX-4 cannons, both made by the Taman Bach Corporation. Unlike the Sinar equivalent, and like most other laser cannons in the galaxy, their lasers are colored red-orange.
Okay, so I have a theory about this because that is a visual that is a very visual indicator in Star Wars for different colors. Different colors typically mean stuff, especially with like lightsabers. Although they kind of a little too far, I think, with lightsabers nowadays. It was a little more simpler back then. But when it comes to like the types of chemicals they use to create the laser blasts from these different companies. It's no secret a lot of stuff from Star Wars is very much inspired by World War II stuff. Heck, the star battles. The battles in space in Star Wars. It might as well be World War II ships. Fighting each other in a naval battle with these other smaller starfighters doing dogfights like it's World War II, right? Same thing with a lot of weapons they use in Star Wars. A lot of it's just modified World War II weapons to make it look all spacey and stuff. Well, I think this actually also relates to that as far as the color of powder used in tracers. If I remember correctly, I think the Allies, although maybe more specifically the US, used red-looking tracers for their guns. Whereas I believe the Germans used green tracers in theirs. And if that's the case, then, yep, makes sense to me.
Another important difference is that the TIE Fighters only have laser cannons, whereas the X-Wing has quad lasers and 2 Krupp-X MG7 proton torpedo launchers, meaning that the
torpedoes.
X-Wing, especially in a group, was more than capable of challenging ships bigger than itself. Or if one knows their history, at least one moon-sized Imperial superweapon that could destroy planets. One last note of difference between the two starfighters is that the X-Wing pilot is never alone on their missions for the Rebel Alliance.
Yep, you always got your
as
little
each
buddy.
X-Wing was equipped with an astromech droid, Often the
A
R2 model, which became ubiquitous with the craft.
R2D2.
Astromech droids were important for the X-Wing as they acted as nav computers that allowed for the complex mathematical calculations that made hyperspace travel possible. In addition to that, the Astromech improved on the X-Wing's survivability by being able to perform in-flight repairs. But while numbers and component lists help to establish why a starfighter is appealing on an intellectual level, it is the stories of the X-Wing that help to define their character and capture the hearts and minds of potential pilots and enthusiastic onlookers.
Yep.
One such story is the Battle of Idolani, during the latter half of the Galactic Civil War in the span of time after the Rebel Alliance's defeat at Hoth, but before the Battle of Endor. 3 years after the Battle of Yavin, the Rebel Alliance had been receiving intelligence communiques from an unknown officer inside the Empire. Unwilling to let this mystery informant continue to be a mystery, Alliance High Command ordered the raid of an Imperial communications array to pick up the signal trail left by the officer and ascertain his identity. Interestingly enough, while the rebels were conducting their operation, the officer in question sent a transmission to them revealing himself as a man named Zaletta, an Imperial commander stationed aboard a space platform in the Idolani system. In
Oh.
addition, he made known to the rebels his intentions to defect. High Command could not let this opportunity slip by, and decided to strike while the iron was hot. A flight of Red Squadron
I'm pretty sure this was a actual mission storyline in either X-Wing or maybe more likely TIE Fighter, of a Imperial defector, and it was your job to either ensure he defected safely or capture him, make sure his defection is incomplete. It's been a minute since I played.
X-Wings based off the calamari cruiser Liberty were sent in to attack the Imperial outpost which held Commander Zaletta. Presumably, as no attack by the rebels was ever conceived by Imperial leadership, their defenses were quickly overwhelmed and the platform soon came under attack.
Is this still canonical? It is to me, damn it. I don't care what Disney says. This is still canon. This is the true canon. Disney stuff's all fanon. This is canon.
Directly.
Everything
but the
in the
rebels
90s
were
was
not there
canon.
to simply attack and destroy the outpost. No. The plan was to attack and make the Imperials think the chances for complete destruction were imminent. At that point, when structural integrity began to be threatened, the personnel would evacuate the base in Tidarium shuttles. And when that happened, the X-Wings would run identification flybys of each shuttle to determine which one Zaletta was aboard, and in the chaos of the evacuation,
You know what's funny is that, as far as color coding goes, I see the red blast, I think Rebels. I see the green blast, and I think Imperials. However, when you see like visual identifications of them, the green is actually the Rebels, and now the red is the Imperials. Despite the fact that the Rebels have a red emblem to represent their forces. It's like, pick a color, guys. We keep swapping back and forth. What are we going? What are we doing here?
spirit him away to the Rebel Alliance's side of the fence. Fortunately for the rebels, the plan went exactly as planned. The station was attacked and brought to the point where destruction was a real possibility, forcing the Imperial staff and officers to flee aboard their evacuation shuttles. One of which was a shuttle designated AA-23, which, as luck would have it, was transporting a man named Commander Zaletta, their mystery informant. And after a
Yeah,
brief
AA-23. I
communication
remember
between
that
the
name.
rebels and Zaletta,
Or that
was fully
designation.
on board with their plans for exfiltration. Together, the X-Wings and Zaletta would travel back to the rebel fleet, but instead of heading to friendly space directly, the rebels would instead drop out of hyperspace at a point between the outpost and their fleet, and have Zaletta's shuttle dock with the rebel frigate Redemption.
Yeah, the original X-Wing had green as friendly and red as hostile, which also makes sense as far as like color theming in Star Wars, right? Red has always been associated with the dark side, because of red lightsabers, and then blue, and then later on green lightsabers were the light side, you know. So I'm sure they kind of kept it with that idea in mind. But still, it's funny that the lasers are reversed. But like I said, I think the lasers were a direct representation to tracer colors used in World War II.
And from there, the rebels would safely hyperspace back to their territory. But no sooner did Shuttle AA-23 dock with the Redemption and transfer their no longer unknown benefactor aboard, the Imperial Star Destroyer Subjugator and the Interdictor Cruiser Restrainer
Interdictor
hyperspace directly
cruisers.
into the area
Those are
of
so cool.
operations. A trap had been sprung, and the only way the Imperials would know to come to this specific point in the entire vastness of space is if someone tipped them off. And that someone, it seemed, was Commander Zaletta.
Okay, I got a
Now,
feeling this
an
is actually
Imperial
a TIE
ambush is
Fighter
just a regular
storyline.
day for Rebel starfighter pilots.
This sounds
but
very
what
familiar.
made this situation in particular extremely dangerous was the Interdictor cruiser trailing the Subjugator. Interdictors were designed with one purpose in mind: block ships from escaping into hyperspace.
Okay, hold on.
As
okay. Get 1 second, guys. All right, you can see this. All right, okay, guy. Oh, okay. All right. If I had to see that, you did too.
Interdictors were designed with one purpose in mind: block ships from escaping into hyperspace, as well as pulling them out of hyperspace using the 4 gravity well generators all interdictors had equipped.
Yep.
Escape was impossible.
The reason that is the case is that hyperdrives have a safety built in. Even though you are technically traveling in like an alternate kind of dimension, the gravity wells that are generated by planets can, to my knowledge, cause you to impact them. I'm not entirely sure how it works technically. It's been a long time since I've learned about hyperspace travel. But the idea is that the hyperdrive has a built-in safety mechanism that will trigger if you get too close to a body that has a gravity well, keeping the starfighter from, or the just the ship in general, the starship that's going in hyperspace. It keeps you from colliding with big celestial bodies in real space. And so the interdictor essentially imitates that. It generates its own gravity wells, not enough to be like a true force of gravity against like other like things in, like around it. You know, like you're not just gonna start suddenly. Well, you might drift a little bit towards the interdictor. I'm not really sure how truly strong they are, but it messes with the gravity field enough to where it'll trick the hyperspace safety mechanisms to trigger to get ships out of hyperspace and back into real space. So yeah, these things are really scary for the rebellion at various choke points for hyperspace lanes for that reason, you know, because it's like, oh, you can't use hyperspace to escape everywhere, you know. This is the equivalent of the trying to drive home at 10 p.m. and you know there's a sobriety checkpoint. You know, it's like, oh, you better not be one of them rebels having a kickback, driving down the. I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, you get the idea. Yeah, that's the idea.
Supposedly. But given the high priority placed on Commander Zaletta's defection, the Calamari cruiser Liberty hyperspaced into the combat area and began launching Y-wing bombers against the interdictor. The plan was simple: hit the interdictor hard enough for it to either flee or be destroyed, then hyperspace out quickly to avoid taking too many losses, especially with the Liberty in system.
Oh my gosh, that
as
green
the
is
loss
burning
of
in my
any
eyes.
of the Rebel Alliance's few Calamari cruisers.
What do we got here? The Liberty hypered into engage the INT directly, but given how the XWA mission plays out, most of the work is done with X-Wings and Y-Wings. Oh, this is so this is a X-Wing Alliance game. That's what it was. That was so that was the name of the third game of the trilogy for the Star Wars X-Wing PC series. Is you have X-Wing TIE Fighter, and then you have X-Wing Alliance, which was a really cool way to kind of show how like the average person just kind of not involved in the conflict at all gets brought into the conflict, you know. Now there's certain things about it that kind of, I mean, I would personally rather play a TIE Fighter just because I like focusing on that stuff, whereas the X-Wing Alliance switches between your civilian life issues and then now your military, um, your military role as a rebel fighter pilot. Like it jumps between them. Well, I'll have to go back and give it another shot. I'm sure I'd probably like it even more now than I did back then. But um, okay, so this is a direct reference to the missions that happens in X-Wing Alliance. I wasn't sure if this sounded like it would have happened during TIE Fighter, but I guess this actually happens during the X-Wing Alliance. So that makes sense. That's why some of these names and designations I'm hearing are ringing bells. I'm like, I know that. What is that from? There you go. It's from X-Wing Alliance.
Cruisers would be a devastating loss. Unfortunately, standing between them and the interdictor was the Star Destroyer Subjugator. With its turbo lasers, anti-fighter weaponry, and whole squadrons of TIE fighters and TIE bombers that would be launched in staggered
TIE interceptors
groups,
in advance.
the TIE bombers would attack the frigate and the Liberty, while the TIE fighters would provide cover for the bombers, much like the same way the X-Wings would cover the Y-Wings against the interdictor. As the X-Wings charged into the TIE swarm, they tore through their foes like tissue paper to a fire. The TIE fighters and interceptors were simply outmatched by the superior abilities and piloting of the X-Wings, and the battle eventually devolved into a slaughter where the subjugator fed its TIE squadrons to the ever-hungry maw of the rebel starfighters, with the TIE bombers meeting a similar fate. But the X-Wing pilots were also tasked to engage the interdictor restrainer, and while not as specialized in the role of anti-capital ship operations, was more than able to assist the Y-Wings in forcing the restrainer to flee or face oblivion by their combined laser fire and proton torpedo warheads.
Oh. Remember, kids, cap ships in XWA won't shoot down your torpedoes if you dumbfire them without a lock. All right, I'm gonna have to remember that when I play through it again next. Also, fires in space. You love to see it, right? Good old Star Wars logic.
Even the TIE Advanced, a technologically superior fighter on paper, which arrived late into the battle, was able to be held at bay long enough by the X-Wings for the Liberty and Redemption to make their escape once the restrainer was out of the picture, with the X-Wings and Y-Wings following shortly behind them. The Battle of Idolani serves to highlight the multi-purpose versatility of the X-Wing. Here, we had the starfighters take part in the interception of the TIE bombers, successfully dogfight other space superiority fighters despite being outnumbered, supporting an anti-capital ship assault, and engaging in capital ship defense and escort, all of which the X-Wing clearly excelled at.
Yeah.
As for Zaletta and the mole who betrayed the meeting point to the Imperials, it turned out the traitor wasn't Commander Zaletta at all. It was a rebel officer aboard the Liberty who had been captured and brainwashed by the Imperials after the Battle of Hoth.
Oh.
And to make a long story short, that man was found out shortly after the Battle of Idolani, which cleared Zaletta of any deception. Of course, that was just one battle where the X-Wing can be pointed to as a key, if not the decisive factor in a conflict. Beginning from their explosive debut at the Battle of Turkana, there's the destruction of the Death Star and the Death Star 2, the majority of Operation Strike Fear, the evacuation of Hoth, and the Outer Rim campaign against Task Force Vengeance, among many, many battles spanning between the early days of the Rebellion and up to the height of the New Republic, and beyond.
I want that as a
And what
model
of
for my
after the
desk.
Galactic Civil War? Well, the X-Wing continued its service with the newly founded New Republic,
Wait.
and in the hands of its skilled pilots,
Wait a minute.
continued its reputation as a popular Republic. And in the hands of its skilled pilots, the X-Wing continued its service.
Why does this look like Mike Myers is now a starfighter rebel pilot? That was a very knee jerk reaction I had when I first saw. Like, wait a minute. Oh, okay. No, he's got okay.
With
All
the
right.
newly founded New Republic, and in the hands of its skilled pilots, continued its reputation as a popular, reliable starfighter that was often chosen over the more advanced E-Wing.
Clearly not
And
Mike
as
Myers
time
there.
marched on through the Yuzon Vong War and into the Second Galactic Civil War,
I guess to say
new
Michael Myers.
X-Wing models would debut, such as the XJ series, which had improved shields, maneuverability, targeting computers.
I'm using Disney's T6 or T70 X-wing as a stand-in to differentiate between the T65s and the XJs. Yeah, yeah, I noticed. Man, while it's a cool looking design, and it actually, the T70 here, even though this is supposed to represent the XJ series, it's clearly a T70. The ideas of it, the visually of it looks cool because it's actually a callback to the X-Wing's earlier pre-designs that they were going through when filming the original Star Wars film, which would eventually become Episode 4. They had they had basically a single engine like that, and they could separate into basically like two half circle engines, right? So this actually is a lot closer to what they were originally having the X-Wing look like on paper before the eventual design for the T65. But man, I gotta tell you, anytime I see anything remotely related to Disney Star Wars, I'm just, ugh, bad taste in my mouth. Anyway, the XJ series has deflector shields, has better maneuverability, target computer, and sublight acceleration.
Sublight acceleration, and a third proton torpedo launcher.
Oh, it's got 3 now.
As for the Incom Corporation, they never fully recovered from the loss of talent, or the massive hit in reputation they took when they were forced to work for the Imperial Navy. And the Imperials were less than pleased with Incom due to the loss of the X-Wing.
Hey, I know that guy. I did work for him in X-Wing, or I mean in Star Wars TIE Fighter.
And the defection of its design staff. These attitudes could be seen with the less than enthusiastic usage of Incom's Y-85 Titan dropship during the Battle of Hoth. The ex-Incom staff members who left, however, prospered. After the Battle of Endor, they would form their own company to make military vehicles,
Yeah, half circle turbines.
Free Tech Incorporated, and to prove to the galaxy that the X-Wing was not just a one-hit wonder. They created the E-Wing for the New Republic military, which eventually became a well-regarded, highly capable mainstay in the fleet, even if it never reached the heights of fame that its older sister, the X-Wing, did.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember the E-Wing. The E-Wing was supposed to be like the replacement, the successor to the X-Wing, and while it was a decent platform, it never could reach the heights that the X-Wing did, and I think for that reason they kept the X-Wing around longer than they were originally anticipating, or they were originally intending for it to. That's cool looking design though. Look at that thing. That looks pretty cool. But yeah, it did not perform the X-Wing, and so unfortunately it's the ship that could have, but couldn't.
Did not forget their roots, and once the Incom Corporation was fully wrested free of control from the Galactic Empire, Free Tech.
Yeah, another note here. There's conflicting stories about Incom's fate between New Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels and Essential Guide to Warfare. I need to pick those books up. I really like those older books where it shows like the complete breakdown of the vehicles, you know, and gives you all sorts of like cool insights. Like I remember seeing that growing up in the 90s. I need to get some of those books. Those are really cool, but I want to get the older books. I'm a little concerned to see what they changed in the Disneyfied version of those books. Yeah.
Tech took ownership over their former employer, and the Free Tech logo and branding would be used to represent the new Weapons and Avionics division for Incom. And finally, no mention of the X-Wing would be complete without at least touching upon the one rebel squadron that arguably did the most to make the Starfighter a legend during the Galactic Civil War.
Why does it look like a Grateful Dead logo?
And up into the time of the Galactic Alliance. Rogue Squadron.
Rogue Squadron.
Rogue Squadron's origins began after the climactic Battle of Yavin, where the remnants of Red Squadron were combined to make Rogue Flight, and later Rogue Group by the time of the disaster at Hoth.
Yep.
They were led by rebel pilot, Death Star killer, and future Jedi Luke Skywalker,
there he is,
alongside fellow Red Squadron survivor Wedge Antilles and a small number of other pilots.
Oh,
but after...
What's the note here? Wedge gets the gold frame because he survived the GCW and 2 Death Stars and didn't need the Force to do it. That is true. As far as like OG, like top tier starfighter pilots. Like Luca's great. There's no doubt about it, especially with his lineage. But you can also thank the Force for that. Is very strong in the Force, so that helps out. This guy's just pure talent, no Force needed.
After Hoth was when Rogue Group would be expanded into Rogue Squadron through the efforts of Wedge Antilles. Combining the best pilots in the Alliance together, the Rogues would not have a set mission profile, but instead work as an elite, versatile unit that could handle any mission all the way up into the era of the Galactic Alliance, 137 years after the Battle of Yavin. And while to go into their history of accomplishments would be far beyond the
I think this image is actually an image from one of the Star Wars books. This actually might be the image for the book Wedge's Gamble, which I think is the second book in the Star Wars Rogue Squadron book series in the 90s. I have that book. I forgot a lot of what happened in it. I need to go back and reread those Star Wars books. I just need to go back and reread Star Wars books in general that were, the good canon.
Scope of this video, rest assured, it is quite extensive. And which starfighter in the Alliance Strike Fleet was considered to be the best at multi-role operations? That's right, the X-Wing.
Hey.
Given the wide gamut of Rogue Squadron's missions and the X-Wing's general versatility, it's little wonder why the names Rogue Squadron and X-Wing became almost synonymous with one another.
Wait, what was that note? I missed a note. Rogue did pilot other starfighters when needed, but there is a reason why the X-Wing is on their logo. Oh yeah, that is their mainline space frame. I mean, you need something done in a pinch, or you just need something done well, you get that, unless if you have the ability to get something more specialized. You put the X-Wing on the job, there's a good chance it's going to get it done.
Missions and the X-Wing's general versatility, it's little wonder why the names Rogue Squadron and X-Wing became almost synonymous with one another. It is a special occurrence for spacecraft and vehicles to enter into the public consciousness, which includes such luminaries like the YT-1300 light freighters, the Royal Naboo N-1 starfighters, the Moldy Crow.
Oh, we got a lot of stuff happening here, but we got another note. Let's see what the note is.
1300 light freighters, the Royal Naboo.
My choices here may or may not be objective ones and have some heavy personal biases. I mean, sure, that makes sense. We all do, right?
N-1 starfighters, the Moldy Crow.
Hey, you played the Dark Forces? Yep, Moldy Crow, you know where that's from, except, back then when you were introduced to that starship, it was made up of what would that be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Anywhere from like 5 to 12 5 to 12 shapes. Not a whole lot of polygons. Yeah, the original game released back in, I want to say it was 1995.
And the T-65 X-Wing, a ship so popular that toys are made of it for children to play with, as they dream of high adventures in space and fighting villains.
And that's talking about me when I was younger.
When it comes to the X-Wing. Yes, it's a super capable multi-role starfighter, but thanks to its achievements in the Galactic Civil War, the X-Wing also became emblematic of the idea of the outnumbered, outpowered, yet determined and skilled hero triumphing over evil and their machinations. And that, at its core, is the X-Wing.
Yeah. So freaking cool. Let's take a look at all the Patreon supporters helping out to make this amazing video. So cool. Wow, okay, so yeah, this music right here, this is just straight up Star Wars X-Wing music. Using the like the MIDI tracks. What was it called, Noel? what was it called? It was I'm completely blanking on the MIDI soundboard they used for dynamic music in the Star Wars X-Wing PC games. Muse, was that what it? The Muse engine? iMuse, that's it. Yeah. It was a event-driven music system, so this music would always change depending on what happened next, which is unfortunate because the iMuse had such cool dynamic range. Even though it didn't sound like movie quality, it still sounded really cool, and it had its own personality, and it had enough real cool um, musical stylings to make it really sound and feel like Star Wars music, you know? But when they released special editions of X-Wing and TIE Fighter later on in the 90s using the X-Wing Alliance engine, they scrapped all of that and just straight up had the Star Wars soundtrack in there, which sounds great, right? Like that's still a Star Wars soundtrack. I mean, that stuff still that's I can't speak. That stuff is still peak, but it did lose a lot of the personality that iMuse was able to achieve, which is kind of a bummer. So, anyway, that was our look into the X-Wing, my favorite starfighter of all time. Well, thank you all for checking out this video and watching along with us. Definitely go give Max lore here. I'm a dude who likes to hear himself talk about science fiction and all the cool stuff. Go give him a like and follow. Feel free to leave a like, comment, or subscribe for this channel to let me know if you guys are really down for checking out more of this content. I'd love to provide more of this for you if you guys are interested. And yeah, we got some more fun stuff here, like the YT 2000 vehicle they use in X-Wing Alliance, and the World of Crimson Skies. We'll definitely be talking more about that because that's also a franchise I love and really needs more attention. And yeah, well, thank you all for joining. I hope to see you all here again next time on the dance floor. Take care, everyone.